The crimson emergency lights bathed the Galactic Council chamber in an ominous glow, casting long shadows across the faces of 47 different alien species. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension as Ambassador Jake Morrison stepped up to the podium. His weathered face, marked by decades of diplomatic battles, looked grimmer than anyone had ever seen it. You know that feeling when you're about to drop a bombshell that will change everything? That moment when you take a deep breath and know there's no going back? Jake was living that moment right now. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all galactic treaties, Jake announced, his voice cutting through the shocked silence like a laser through steel. Every word was deliberate, every syllable weighted with finality. Our colonies are evacuating. We're done. The silence that followed was deafening. Could practically hear the collective intake of breath from creatures across the galaxy. Then, like a dam bursting, the chaos began. Council Prime Velarin's massive form trembled with rage, his tentacles writhing in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. Standing 12 feet tall and weighing nearly a ton, he was the embodiment of galactic authority. You cannot simply leave. The Terran integration accords bind you for another century. But Jake Morrison had been preparing for this moment his entire career. He'd watched human innovation get stifled, human expansion get limited, human potential get crushed under the weight of alien bureaucracy. No more. Our void, Jake interrupted, his voice rising with controlled fury. We've tolerated your condescension for decades, your guidance, your restrictions. You're treating us like children who need supervision. His fists clenched at his sides. No more. The chamber erupted into chaos. The insectoid Creolith chittered angrily, her mandibles clicking in rapid-fire patterns that sounded like machine gun fire. The crystalline Valdorons pulsed with indignation, their bodies shifting from cool blue to angry red in waves of color. The reptilian hegemony representatives hissed and showed their fangs. For 40 years, they had carefully managed these primitive humans, limiting their expansion to prevent them from becoming too powerful, controlling their technology to keep them dependent, keeping them in line like pet dogs who occasionally showed too much intelligence for their own good. But here's the thing about humans, that these ancient species never understood. We don't stay down when we're pushed. We get back up, and we get stronger. Good riddance, snarled Commander Throck of the Hegemony, his massive reptilian form rising from his seat. These emotional creatures were disrupting galactic order with their feelings and their chaotic thinking. The other delegates nodded. In agreement, finally they would have peace. Finally, they could return to the proper way of doing things, where each species knew their place and stayed in it. But as Jake Morrison walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber, he turned back one final time. His eyes swept across the assembled delegates, and for just a moment, some of them felt something they hadn't experienced in centuries: doubt. You think you're getting rid of a problem? Jake said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with deadly calm. You have no idea what you're about to lose. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. And prophecies, as these aliens were about to learn, have a way of coming true. The massive doors sealed behind him with a thunderous clang that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. That sound would echo in the memories of every delegate present for the rest of their lives. Within hours, something unprecedented began happening across the galaxy. Human ships, scattered across hundreds of systems, began moving in perfect coordination. It wasn't panic, it wasn't chaos. It was the most organized evacuation in galactic history. From the mining colonies on the rim worlds to the diplomatic stations in the core systems, humans began their exodus. Families packed their belongings with quiet efficiency. Scientists carefully dismantled their research equipment. Soldiers gathered their weapons and prepared for departure. And here's what made it truly terrifying for those watching. There was no desperation, no pleading, no last-minute negotiations, just the calm, methodical withdrawal of an entire species that had apparently been planning this moment for longer than anyone realized. The last transmission from Admiral Lisa Carter came from the edge of known space. Her voice steady and professional as always. Operation Exodus complete. All human vessels departing galactic boundaries. Council... You're on your own now. The silence that followed was deafening. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as the last human ship disappeared into the void beyond the galaxy's edge. What the Council didn't realize was that their carefully ordered galaxy was about to collapse. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. It had been its foundation, its mediators, its problem solvers. They were the ones who kept the peace between species that had been enemies for millennia, and now they were gone. Delegates sat in their chamber, surrounded by the technology that had kept their civilizations stable for decades. Technology that they were about to discover had been quietly maintained and improved by human engineers. Systems that had been running smoothly because human technicians had been working behind the scenes, fixing problems before they became disasters. But perhaps the most chilling realization was yet to come. As the emergency lights finally dimmed and normal lighting returned to the chamber, the assembled delegates began to understand the true scope of what they had just lost. The humans hadn't just left, they had evolved beyond the need for the Council's approval. Somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, they were building something new. Want to understand how small actions can lead to massive consequences? Just like compound interest, the effects of today's decisions multiply over time. Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding and how it applies to every aspect of life. 3 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council chamber had transformed into something unrecognizable. The polished marble floors were scuffed from violent confrontations. The elegant seating arrangements had been rearranged into defensive positions. The air itself crackled with hostility and barely contained rage. You know how a family dinner can turn into World War III over who forgot to pass the salt? Well, imagine that. But with laser weapons and species that had been nursing grudges for thousands of years. The harmonious debates of the past had evolved into snarling matches between species that had barely tolerated each other for millennia. What had once been civilized discourse now resembled a gladiatorial arena, where words were weapons and diplomacy had died a violent death. The Creolith have invaded our mining colonies, shrieked Ambassador Zixara, her crystalline form flashing, angry red, like a neon warning sign. Her voice cut through the chamber like broken glass, each word dripping with fury and desperation. Where are the peacekeepers? Where is the protection we were promised? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The chamber fell silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then all hell broke loose. Local forces. Throke's massive fist slammed onto his console with such force that the reinforced metal buckled. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The humans were preventing 80% of our conflicts. They were the only thing keeping us from tearing each other apart. And there it was. The truth that everyone had been dancing around for 3 months. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been its immune system, its peacekeepers, its voice of reason in a galaxy full of ancient grudges and barely contained violence. High above the chaos, in the observation deck that overlooked the main chamber, young analyst Kyle Thompson watched the collapse unfold with growing horror. At 28, he was one of the few remaining humans in Council employ, and he'd been secretly documenting every argument, every threat, every breakdown in diplomatic relations. The data he'd been gathering painted a terrifying picture. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion, except each card represented an entire star system. And the collapse meant war, famine, and the deaths of billions. "Sir," he called to his supervisor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, his voice tight with urgency, "I need to show you something. Right now." Elena, the chief xenobiologist who'd spent her career studying the intricate relationships between galactic species, looked up from her own reports. At 42, she'd seen enough political turmoil to know when someone was about to deliver catastrophic news. "What is it, Kyle?" The holographic display that materialized above Kyle's workstation revealed the devastating truth in stark, undeniable detail. Charts and graphs showed the intricate web of relationships that had kept galactic civilization stable for 4 decades. Trade routes, diplomatic missions, peace negotiations, cultural exchanges, scientific collaborations. All of it had been orchestrated, facilitated, or directly managed by humans. In 40 years, Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper, humans had become the invisible foundation of galactic civilization. They mediated disputes, facilitated trade, maintained peace between hostile species. They were the glue holding 47 proud, stubborn races together. The implications hit Alina like a physical blow. My God, she whispered, her face draining. Of color. They weren't just members of the council. They were the council. Below them, another fight erupted. The Creolith ambassador, a 7-foot-tall insectoid with razor-sharp mandibles, lunged at a Valdoran delegate. Ancient hatreds, suppressed for decades by human diplomacy, exploded into violence. It's like a dam bursting. The Valdoran's crystalline form flashed from blue to red to white as emergency systems activated. Too late. The chamber descended into chaos as delegates chose sides and old alliances crumbled. This is insane, Alina muttered, watching species that had coexisted peacefully for decades now ready to kill each other over trade disputes that should have been resolved with a simple negotiation. But here's the thing about humans that these alien species never understood. We don't just solve problems. We prevent them from becoming problems in the first place. We have to find them, Alina said urgently, gripping Kyle's arm. Before it's too late. Before this entire galaxy tears itself apart. Kyle was already ahead of her, his fingers flying over his console as he analyzed departure vectors and ship trajectories. His face grew paler with each data point he uncovered. Alina, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and terror. They're not just leaving council space. They're leaving the galaxy. The words hit her like a meteor strike. Intergalactic travel was theoretical at best. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. Technology needed didn't exist. At least not in any form the Council had ever seen. But as Kyle's analysis deepened, the truth became undeniable. The humans hadn't just been hiding their departure plans. They'd been hiding their technological capabilities for decades. While the Council had been treating them like junior partners who needed supervision, humanity had been developing technology that made their ships look like toys. Look at this, Kyle said, pointing to energy signatures that defied everything. They knew about physics. These aren't normal jump drives. These are something completely new, something that can cross the void between galaxies. Alina stared at the data, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. How long have they been planning this? It's based on the infrastructure they left behind, the coordination of their departure, the technology they used. Al ran the calculations again, hoping he was wrong. At least 20 years, maybe longer, 20 years. 2 decades of planning, preparing, and building, while the Council thought they were managing them. It was like discovering that the intern you'd been ordering around had actually been running the company from behind the scenes, down in the main chamber. The violence was escalating. What had started as a diplomatic dispute was becoming a full-scale brawl. Species that had been allies for centuries were now enemies. Trade agreements were being torn up. Defense pacts were being dissolved. The galaxy was falling apart, and there was no one left to put it back together. We're watching the collapse of galactic civilization, Alina said. Her voice filled with a mixture of horror and fascination, and we're helpless to stop it. But Kyle was still analyzing the data, still trying to understand the full scope of what humanity had accomplished. And what he was finding was beyond anything he'd imagined. Alina, he said slowly, I don't think. They just left. I think they evolved beyond us. The realization was terrifying. Somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, humanity was building something new. Something that made the Galactic Council look like children playing with toys. And they were. Completely, utterly alone. Just like compound interest grows exponentially over time. The consequences of ignoring human contributions were multiplying faster than anyone had imagined. Want to see how small, consistent actions can lead to massive results? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding and how it transforms everything it touches. The emergency session that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Picture this: 47 different species, many of whom had been trying to destroy each other for millennia, suddenly sitting in the same room with a single shared goal. It was like watching cats and dogs team up to hunt down the humans, who'd been keeping them from killing each other. For the first time in centuries, every species agreed on one thing: humanity had to be found and brought back. The irony was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Council Prime Valeron shifted uncomfortably in his massive chair, his tentacles writhing in patterns that betrayed his growing panic. The Human Mediation Corps handled those disputes, he replied weakly, his voice lacking the authority it once commanded. Surely local forces can manage a simple territorial disagreement. The chamber buzzed with desperate energy as delegates who'd been at each other's throats just days before now worked together with unprecedented urgency.
The Creolis.
Stopped chittering their war songs. The Valdorans dimmed their aggressive, red glow. Even the massive hegemony representatives leaned forward in their seats, their usual arrogance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. But how? Demanded Ambassador Zixara, her crystalline form pulsing with anxiety. They could be anywhere in the galaxy. We're talking about searching billions of star systems, countless planets, infinite hiding spots. The scope of the task was staggering. It was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on every beach in the world. Except the beaches were star systems, and the sand grains were entire human colonies. But then Captain Marcus Steele stood up. The chamber fell silent. At 55, Marcus was a walking contradiction. He was the human military liaison who'd refused to leave when his entire species evacuated. He built like a tank and twice as stubborn. He'd been training alien security forces for 2 decades. His weathered face bore the scars of a dozen conflicts, and his eyes held the kind of knowledge that only comes from years of command. No, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the panic like a laser through fog. I know these people, trained. With them, I served with them. They're not hiding, they're pioneering. The distinction was crucial, and Marcus knew it. Hiding suggested fear, desperation, weakness. Pioneering suggested vision, planning, strength. Marcus activated the star charts with military precision, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls. The 3-dimensional map of the galaxy materialized above the chamber, showing humanity's departure vectors in brilliant golden lines. They're heading for the galactic rim, Marcus explained, tracing the trajectories. But not to hide in some remote corner like wounded animals. They're going beyond. The word beyond hung in the air like a death sentence. Beyond meant something. That shouldn't be possible. Beyond meant technology that defied everything they thought they knew about physics. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Delegates who'd been whispering fell silent. The ambient noise of the chamber's life support systems seemed to grow louder in the sudden quiet. Intergalactic travel was theoretical at best. The energy requirements were staggering enough to power entire star systems for centuries.
The technology
Needed didn't exist, at least not in any form the Council had ever seen. It was like discovering that someone had figured out how to walk on water while you were still learning to swim. They developed technology we never imagined, Marcus continued, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and regret. Jump drives that can cross galactic distances in days instead of centuries. Ships that can survive in the absolute void between galaxies. They'd been building this for decades. The implications were staggering. While the Council had been treating humans like junior partners who needed constant supervision, humanity had been developing technology that made their most advanced ships look like wooden sailing vessels. Impossible, Throck roared, his massive reptilian form rising from his seat. Our monitoring systems tracked all their technological development. We had oversight, we had control. But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He'd faced down alien warlords, space pirates, and bureaucrats who thought they were gods. One angry reptile wasn't going to faze him. What you allowed them to share? Marcus shot back, his voice rising with controlled anger. But humans don't work that way. When you keep rejecting our contributions, we don't stop innovating, we just stop asking permission. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. For decades, the Council had prided itself on managing human development, and keeping these emotional creatures from becoming too powerful, too independent. But what if they'd been wrong? What if instead of managing humanity, they'd been limiting themselves? Dr. Rachel Adams, the lead physicist who'd been quietly working in the background, stepped forward. At 43, she'd spent her entire career studying the intersection of human and alien technology. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up classified files that painted a devastating picture. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Request after request to share advanced technology. Joint research proposals that could have revolutionized galactic civilization. Offers to upgrade council systems, to improve jump drives, to enhance communication networks, all denied. The records were damning. Page after page of human innovation, creativity, and generosity. Technology that could have prevented wars, ended famines, and pushed galactic civilization to new heights. All rejected. The reasons were always the same: unnecessary. Potentially destabilizing, requires further review. But the real reason was simpler and more shameful. Pride. They weren't keeping secrets, Rachel said quietly, her voice filled with the weight of realization. We were keeping ourselves ignorant. The truth was devastating. For 40 years, humanity had been offering to share their gifts, their knowledge, their innovations. And for 40 years, the council had been too proud, too arrogant, too convinced of their own superiority to accept help from the primitive humans. Now those same humans were gone. And they'd taken with them technology that could have transformed the galaxy. The search fleets launched within days. It was the largest coordinated effort in galactic history. 47 species, working together with unprecedented desperation, all hunting for the race they'd driven away, but searching for someone who doesn't want to be found is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. And humanity had left behind more than just empty space. They'd left behind a trail that defied everything the council thought they knew. It's about physics. The quantum echoes were unlike anything they'd ever seen. Energy signatures that suggested technology beyond their comprehension. Jump residue that indicated speeds that should have been impossible. Humanity's ships had vanished into the void, leaving only the bitter taste of regret and the growing realization that they'd lost something irreplaceable. For the first time in galactic history, the Council faced a terrifying possibility. They were truly alone. The species they'd dismissed as primitive had evolved beyond them, and there was no guarantee they would ever return. In the vast darkness between galaxies, humanity was building something new, something that made the Galactic Council look like children playing with toys, and the Council was beginning to understand that they might have just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Want to understand how small decisions compound into massive consequences. Just like humanity's decades of quiet innovation that suddenly revealed itself as revolutionary technology, the power of compounding transforms everything it touches. Check out my next video to see how this principle can transform your life too. 2. Years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council was dying a slow, agonizing death. The great chamber that had once buzzed with the voices of 47 species now sat nearly empty, its polished marble floors echoing with the footsteps of the few remaining delegates who still believed in salvaging what was left of galactic civilization. You know that feeling when you're watching your favorite restaurant close down, and you realize you took those amazing meals for granted? I'll multiply that by the collapse of an entire galactic government, and you're starting to get the picture. Wars raged across dozens of sectors. The Creolith and Valderons had escalated their mining dispute into a full-scale conflict that had consumed 3 star systems. The hegemony had annexed 12 worlds, while their neighbors were too busy fighting each other to notice. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were now battlegrounds where merchant ships were. Destroyed on sight, the golden age of galactic cooperation was over, and what had replaced it was chaos, violence, and the bitter taste of regret. Dr. Emma Foster, now promoted to senior analyst in what was essentially a promotion aboard a sinking ship, stood before the remaining delegates. At 38, she'd spent the last 2 years documenting the systematic collapse of everything they'd built. Her once bright eyes now carried the weight of watching an entire civilization crumble in her hands. She held humanity's final message, a data packet that had taken months to decode. The encryption was unlike anything they'd ever seen, layers upon layers of security that required the combined efforts of their best cryptographers from 6 different species. They knew, she said simply, her voice carrying across the nearly empty chamber. They knew we would reject them. They knew we would fail. And they prepared for both. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The remaining delegates, barely a dozen representatives from the species that hadn't completely withdrawn from the council, leaned forward in their seats. The message began playing on the main screen, and what they saw took their breath away. Admiral Tom Bradley, commander of the Human Exodus Fleet, appeared in his uniform, standing on the bridge of a ship unlike anything the council had ever seen. The technology visible in the background was sleek, elegant, and powerful in ways that made their most advanced vessels look like Stone Age tools. To our former colleagues, Tom began, his voice steady but tinged with unmistakable sadness. We haven't abandoned you in anger, but in disappointment. For 40 years, we tried to be your partners. You wanted us to be your subjects. The camera pulled back to show more of the ship's bridge, revealing control systems that defied everything they thought they knew about physics. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their faces showing not the desperation of refugees, but the confidence of pioneers. You thought you were managing us, Tom continued, and there was a hint of bitter amusement in his voice. But we were. Managing you? Every trade dispute we resolved, every war we prevented, every bridge we built between your species, we were holding your civilization together. The image shifted to show the human fleet, and the sight was both magnificent and terrifying. Thousands of ships, massive and gleaming, powered by technology that made council vessels look like children's toys. These weren't the desperate escape pods of a fleeing species. These were the ships of a civilization that had evolved beyond the need for anyone's permission. But here's the thing about humans that these aliens never understood. We don't just plan for success. We plan for failure too. Every diplomatic breakthrough you celebrated, Tom explained. Every peace treaty you signed. Every trade agreement that prevented war, we were the invisible hand making it all possible. You were the translators, the mediators, the peacemakers you never knew you needed. The delegates watched in stunned silence as the recording showed human colonies throughout the galaxy, all evacuated with military precision. No panic, no chaos, no desperate last-minute scrambles. Just the disciplined withdrawal of a species that had planned for this moment for decades. We leave you not as enemies, but as teachers, Tom said, his voice growing softer.
Else.
The galaxy you built without us is the galaxy you truly wanted one, where every species stands alone, supreme in their own domain, needing no one else. The irony was devastating. They'd spent 40 years trying to keep humanity in their place, never realizing that humanity had been keeping them in theirs. Look around you now, Tom continued, as if he could see into the future. Look at what you've accomplished without us. This is your true nature revealed at last. It's proud, isolated, convinced of your own superiority, and completely unable to work. Together, without someone else doing the heavy lifting, the message shifted to show something that made the remaining delegates gasp. Technical specifications, scientific data, technological blueprints, freely shared, all given without conditions or restrictions. We're leaving you our gifts, Tom said. Not because you deserve them, but because despite everything, we still believe in what you could become. The coordinates included in this message will lead you to a research station we've left behind. On it, detailed plans for the technology we've developed, the secrets we've kept, the gifts we've been waiting to share. The generosity was staggering. Even in their departure, even after being rejected and dismissed for decades, humanity was still trying to help. They're still trying to help us, whispered Council Prime Valoran, his ancient voice breaking with emotion. The massive alien leader who'd once commanded the respect of an entire galaxy now looked small and frail in his oversized chair. Question, Emma said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 2 years of analysis and soul-searching, is whether we're finally ready to accept it. The message ended with one final revelation that sent shockwaves through the chamber. The research station wasn't just a gift, it was a test. The technology inside would only activate for species that could work together. They could set aside their pride and prejudices long enough to cooperate. They're not just giving us their technology, Emma explained. They're giving us one last chance to prove we can be worthy of it. The few remaining delegates looked at each other across the nearly empty chamber. Species that had been enemies for millennia now faced a choice: continue their petty squabbles and let galactic civilization collapse, or swallow their pride and work together to rebuild what they'd lost in the vast darkness between galaxies. Humanity was building something new, something that the Council was only beginning to understand. They might never be worthy of joining, but the gift remained, waiting for the day when the galaxy might finally grow up enough to accept it, just like compound interest. The consequences of the Council's decisions had been building for decades, and now they were seeing the full impact of their choices. Want to understand how small actions compound into massive results over time? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding and how it shapes everything around us. 5 years had passed since humanity's departure, and the Galactic Council was now a shadow of its former glory. The massive chamber that had once hosted 47 different species now echoed with the footsteps of representatives from only 12 worlds. The rest had either collapsed into civil war or retreated into isolationism, licking their wounds and nursing grudges that had festered for millennia. You know that feeling when you're standing in an abandoned shopping mall, remembering how alive it used to be? That's what the council chamber felt like now, a monument to better times that no one knew how to get back to. Dr. Emma Foster stood alone in the vast space, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors as she reviewed the final reports. At 43, she'd spent the last 5 years documenting the systematic collapse and gradual rebuilding of galactic civilization. Her hair had gone prematurely gray, and her eyes carried the weight of watching an entire galaxy learn the hardest lesson of all. That pride comes before the fall. The human research station had been their salvation. The technology freely shared had prevented total galactic collapse, fusion reactors that could power entire systems, medical technology that had eliminated diseases that had plagued species for centuries, agricultural advances that had ended famines on dozens of worlds. But it was too little, too late. The galaxy had been broken, and while they'd managed to patch it back together, the cracks still showed. "Any word from the deep space monitors?" asked Captain Marcus Steele, one of the few humans who'd remained behind when his species evacuated. At 60, he'd become something of a legend among the remaining council for the human who'd stayed. To help clean up the mess his people had predicted, Emma shook her head, her expression grim. Nothing. They're out there, somewhere beyond the galactic rim, building something new. The deep space monitors had been humanity's final gift sensors, capable of detecting activity across intergalactic distances. For 5 years, they'd been scanning the void, looking for any sign of human civilization. But space between galaxies is vast beyond comprehension, and finding someone who doesn't want to be found is like looking for a specific grain of sand in an infinite desert. "Maybe that's for the best," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 5 years of reflection. "Look what we did to this place." He gestured around the nearly empty chamber. Where there had once been vibrant debate and collaborative decision-making, now there were only the echoes of what could have been. But then, just as Emma was about to respond, the chamber doors burst open with a thunderous crash. A young technician rushed in, his face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "Dr. Foster, we're receiving a transmission from the void. It's them." The words hit the chamber like a lightning strike. After 5 years of silence, after 5 years of wondering if humanity had survived their journey into the unknown, they were finally making contact. The main screen flickered to life with a clarity that was almost supernatural. Admiral Lisa Carter appeared, older now, but still commanding. Her uniform crisp, and her bearing suggesting confidence born from extraordinary accomplishments. Behind her, glimpses of massive structures could be seen, cities in space that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built, ships the size of continents, architecture that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "Greetings, Council," Lisa said, her voice carrying across the vast distance with perfect clarity. "We've been watching. Your species are learning to work together. Slowly, but learning." Emma stepped forward, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and shame. "Admiral, we... we made a mistake. We're sorry." The words felt inadequate, like trying to apologize for burning down a forest with a single match. But they were all she had. Lisa smiled sadly, the expression of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. "We know, but apologies won't repair 40 years of damage. You have to earn redemption." The transmission shifted to show flashes of human achievements that took Emma's breath away. New worlds being terraformed with technology that made planets bloom with life in decades instead of centuries. Medical advances that had eliminated aging and disease. Art and culture that had flourished beyond imagination in the freedom of deep space. "We're not coming back," Lisa continued, and the words hit Emma like a physical blow. "But we're not abandoning you either. When you're ready, truly ready to be partners instead of masters, to be students instead of teachers, to be friends instead of rulers, we'll be here." The images continued to flow, vast manufacturing complexes that existed in the void between stars, research stations that pushed the boundaries of science, communities that had achieved harmony between technology and nature in ways the Council had never imagined. Humanity hadn't just survived their exodus. They'd thrived beyond anything the galaxy had ever achieved. "Look for us in the space between stars," Lisa said, her voice growing distant as the signal began to fade. "We'll be building something new, something better. And when you've proven you can do the same, perhaps we'll build it together." The transmission ended, leaving Emma standing in the empty chamber with tears streaming down her face. The greatest teachers in the galaxy were gone, driven away by pride and fear. But their lesson remained, carved into the very fabric of the galaxy's recent history. True civilization wasn't about dominance or control. It was about cooperation, understanding, and the courage to see beyond your own perspective. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They're giving us hope," he said quietly. "Even after everything we did to them, they're still giving us hope." The few remaining delegates had gathered around the screen, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and regret that Emma felt. They'd had the greatest civilization in the galaxy in their hands, and they'd thrown it away because they couldn't swallow their pride. But humanity's message wasn't one of condemnation. It was one of possibility. Maybe in time, the galaxy would learn that lesson. Maybe in time, they would be worthy of humanity's return. The technology left behind in the research station was already transforming their worlds, not just technologically, but socially. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together on projects that benefited everyone. The Creolith and Valdorans had ended their war and were now collaborating on mining operations that were more efficient than anything either species had achieved alone. The hegemony had returned the worlds they'd annexed and was working on environmental restoration projects. It was slow progress, but it was progress. But for now, they were alone with their choices, their failures, and the distant hope that redemption was still possible. In the vast darkness between galaxies, humanity was building something that made the Council's greatest achievements look like children's toys. And maybe, just maybe, they were building it for the day when the galaxy would finally grow up enough to join them, the end just. Like humanity's decades of patient preparation that finally revealed itself in their incredible exodus, the power of compounding works in ways that seem impossible until you see the results. Want to understand how small, consistent actions can lead to extraordinary transformations? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding and discover how it can change your life too.